Good afternoon all. Yesterday I tried to solder a big piece of thick wire between two fork terminals, screwed down heavily onto these supercapacitor terminals, and of course I wasn't doing very well with the TS100 soldering iron because, well, all the heat was flowing down into the supercapacitors, which isn't good for the supercapacitors really. So it was all a bit cack-handed, and I was just thinking, how could I do this better? But with these two fork terminals clamped down in such a way that this pitch is all correct, and I've thought of a method, and it's going to use a jig. And by jig, no, I don't mean a lively dance with leaping movements. I mean an alignment tool. Got to be careful not to short this across to the other terminal because I don't know how well charged these capacitors are. Yes, an alignment tool. Oh, I can't get that out. Just a piece of wood, actually. This piece of wood. So what's the distance between these two holes with these two supercapacitors hot glued together? And yes, I redid the hot glue because it was an absolute mess. Let's just measure that starting at 100, moving my eye to allow for parallax, and I reckon it's about 22 millimeters. Right, 22 millimeters across here. That's from there to there, and we'll draw some straight lines in. I will now drill that. Actually, I'm going to spike it first so I get my center punched holes. One spiked and the other one spiked. Now to drill. Yes, I do like making up little jigs. Probably should have done this on a firm base. That one's through. That one's through. A couple of screws with fairly large diameter heads. Let's thread them in, getting them parallel, and put those in there, which will hold that. Awesome. So now I'm not going to get all the sucking of heat that I had when they were screwed down onto here, because now they're screwed down into wood. Let's have another go at reflowing all of this with the TS100 soldering iron. Now, just one thing that I hadn't worked out in my review video of this thing. If you don't press the lower button, you press the upper button, you actually get the input voltage. So you can see I've got about 3.4 volts going in. You also get the ambient temperature, or the temperature of the tip, I suppose it is. If you press that button, now it says in the manual, press this button to get the temperature, and then press and hold both buttons, but actually it doesn't seem to work on here. I have to press the button to get the factory reset. I don't want to do that. That's interesting. When you get factory reset, you can also press to get work temperature. I've set it to 280 now by editing the config file on my PC. Standby temperature 180, sleep time 60 seconds. So yeah, you can go through all of those parameters that are in that config.txt file. But if you press and hold this second button, it actually does the calibration routine. I'm not entirely sure what that's doing, but it says you have to do it in the manual. Okay, let's fire this thing up, warm it up to 280 degrees. And last time I was doing this on the supercapacitors at 400 degrees. It was the only way I could get enough energy into the tip. And of course, as soon as I touched onto here, it all got sucked out of the tip. Hopefully, and of course I'm using this relatively low voltage, 13.4 volts. I've probably only got about 25 watts available to the tip at this low voltage, but hopefully I'll get on much better with this now that I haven't got all the metal around it. Okay, so a little bit of cleaning of the tip. Let's put some solder on the tip and let's try and reflow this. Oh, let me get in closer. Right, let's apply some heat to that. Still seems to be struggling a bit. Let's wind the temperature up. So press and hold the top button And let's take that up to, I don't know, 350. Wait for it to warm up. There we are. Okay, let's bring the camera back down. Apply the iron and hope that I can melt the entire thing on both sides. Yes, it is melting. I've actually got probably way too much solder on here now, but I can reflow the whole thing. The fork terminals don't move because of my jig. That should look a lot prettier. Well, I'm not sure about pretty exactly, but it's certainly a lot more symmetrical. Yes, I've managed to get the whole thing hot, and the solder has reflowed nice and symmetrically. Because the point is, I'm going to have more of these capacitors sort of all banked up, sitting next to each other. So I'm going to have to make several of these little bridges at that 22mm span. So yeah, I mean, making a little simple jig for that job makes perfect sense. And now the iron has sat motionless for 60 seconds, and so it's going into its cool down for standby. So it's going from 350, and now it gives you this cute little graphic where it shows you the current temperature and the destination temperature. So it's current, well, it was at 350, it's now at about 300, and it's on its way down to 180, which I set in the config file inside the soldering iron as my standby temperature, is it, or sleep temperature? I can't remember which one's which now. And as it approaches that standby temperature, then you go back to the full screen temperature there, and it's just going to sit there at 180. Yes, it's going to hold at 180 for the second time out period, whereupon it goes to sleep completely and goes completely cold. Now if I wakey it with the accelerometers, what's it going to go back up to? Let's have a quick look. Will it be 280, which is my config temperature? No, it's actually going back to the temperature that I had overridden to, which was 350, which makes logical sense. Of course, if I pull the power and put that back in, then of course it will go back to 280, which is the working temperature that I've put in the config file. Right, don't need the iron anymore, so let's press both buttons, put it to sleep, and unscrew these from here. They've now cooled down, so I can put that bridging link back on my supercapacitors. Tighten these up, and yeah, good to go. I'm happy with that. Cheerio.